Recording in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, everybody, and to my good friends, Dr. Jeff and Timothy. Welcome to another exciting podcast of Adventures in Truth. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween to you as well.
Thanks.
Halloween Eve.
What's the pagan version? There's a pagan version. I know there is, but I can't remember what it is. All Hallows Eve.
All Hallows Eve, yep.
Yeah. So,
the night for trick or treating.
A night for trick or treating. So we've been having some fun. It's been a very interesting weekend, and I come today with a bit of a burning question. I had a very interesting experience earlier today, and out of that experience, I had tapped into some very old feelings and old energy that felt like it was. My words to the gentleman I was speaking to today was, it felt like it went back to the beginning. And I didn't know what the beginning of what, but it just felt that big and that long ago, and that I could feel the history. And so the topic of this conversation started with this sense of having been in a religious capacity through many experiences on the earth, and this idea of surrendering to the greater power, or giving, allowing God to direct your life, let go, let God, all that kind of experience. And something happened in the midst of that, and it was this question, and there was a realization in the process of seeing this history as the dots were connecting and these pictures are flashing in front of my face, and I'm like, okay, now I'm confused, because part of the thing that was feeling painful and feeling uncomfortable was this idea that I surrendered to God's will, and then God didn't show up. And I couldn't figure out why, and it didn't make sense to me. And so as I was prying more into that, what it brought me to was this question of, is it really about God's will, or is it really about my will? And is God's will and my will different? And if I'm allowing God's will, where does my will go? Because we've had many conversations, and some of them have actually addressed to some degree the idea that human will is driven by ego. So if human will is driven by ego and we want to get to God's will, okay, but what is that? What does that mean? What is that? Is it possible that energy can be that narrowly focused, where the idea, I guess, being, here we are, this spark of God, this bit of God in human experience, in the human expression, and that heart, that love, that spark is actually that connection to the greater source. So, and yet it should be me, and yet that doesn't feel good either. So I'm on it. The question is a conundrum, and it's also seems to be really sort of quintessential to what we enjoy diving into and peeling the layers back on. And as we were waiting for you, Timothy, this was we had a minor conversation, and Jeff said, "Stop talking. Let's bring it to the podcast."
Awesome.
So the core of the question has to do with God's will versus man's will, and if even in this lifetime, I've created through my program, and these state shifting statements that help me as a part of my meditation to kind of expand my space and open up my energy, has been about surrendering to that will, to that energy and that flow of God or universal energy, or however you want to call that. And now I'm sitting here thinking, have I made an error in judgment? Is that really a flawed premise? Isn't God trying to experience here? Why am I trying to go there if he's here? And if he's here, or I'm saying he, and I apologize that that's sort of sexually driven, but it's not. it just or personifying it in a male context, and that's not. I don't mean that in any other way than that's the word that came out of my mouth. So, are you guys following where I'm flowing here? Where this is?
Keep going, brother. Go on.
Yeah, and if you could help me understand, you're doing great, sure. But I'm wondering where the conundrum began. I guess not understanding the context,
Perfect. Yes. We have to understand the context. It's to have any kind of a meaningful dialogue, we have to start with context. And so we're talking about will. We're talking about our will as if we know what we are. We're also talking about God's will as if we know what God is. And as we've talked many times, and I keep coming to this conclusion, none of this is knowable. It's all speculation. In order to talk about God's will, we would have to know who and what God is. And in order to talk about our will, we would have to know who and what we are. And we don't. It's just guessing. It's just speculation. It's just a lot of confabulation. And, maybe it's accurate. Maybe it's on target, but maybe it's not. And who amongst the three of us wants to take a shot at what is God? Really?
I think we spent 9 hours talking about that at the think tank. No, yeah.
Well, thank you all for listening. And this.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.
So what is God? And why would God even have a will? And why would God have a will for us?
Unless we were programmed to think that that's how it went. Outside of that indoctrination, what evidence do we have that there's something with a will for our well-being?
There is a consistency throughout, at least to my understanding, there is a consistency throughout human experience of an experience of something greater than this human experience.
Yeah.
Something guiding or holding the space for, and maybe that's even a better way to play in this idea is we talk all the time as either as healers or practitioners, this idea of holding space is so important because we're holding space for an individual to find their space. So we hold the space of healing so that individual can find their healing, because we're not doing anything other than creating a space for them to find their own.
Sure.
Right? So what if the idea of God is the same thing? He's holding this energy that just holds a space.
That sounds really nice, but it sounds like a hope that we might have that about as having a sky daddy that can do all that for us. At what point do we need to get into a space where that's why is that necessary? Why do we need to personify the great mystery of the universe as being held for us? Like it kind of puts, I know I'm special to my family, but I don't think I'm special to to deep space or the powers that run the universe. I don't think there'll be a blink if I'm not here. And the idea that someone greater than me is looking out after all that is, I think that's part of the big problem with religion in the first place, is it's taking the power away from, for me personally, it took a lot of critical thinking and power in getting the information that I need to make educated, practical choices on how to do things and not rely on something that I can't see. And that doesn't mean that I don't tap into something really beautiful that's flowing through. I think that there's an energy that runs subatomic particles. We don't really know what that is. I think that when we spend some time being with that, I got Is that, am I back on?
You're back to
You
the
are.
computer.
Okay. Yeah. I guess going from something seeming a little bit off in a day, and wondering about what my will and my choices and everything. And then if something doesn't go the way I think it's supposed to, or I have an expectation or an attachment to what God is going to take care of that day. Like, I guess I'm not understanding how you ended up having a rub today. Like you went
Well,
from
part of
thinking
the-
God,
part of-
God had it,
part of
and
the
then
thing
you.
that I think part of the reason you have a rub is because you have an issue with that word. You have an issue with the concept of God for me, which kind of clouds how you see the rest of it. Because
No matter what,
I don't.
no,
see it
no
as
matter
any
how
different.
you, no matter how you name it, it's still getting away from our power to be in full presence of what we can get into. I call it universe, call it source,
No.
call it whatever. I'm not in a space that I think that something else is responsible for taking care of me. I guess is what I'm hearing you say so far, and I could be off on it, but it sounds like you got frustrated with the way something was going, and you had released your will on it and trusted the universe or source or whatever, and it didn't go the way your attachment had hoped it would, and now it creates this great question of like, what did I just do? Why did I give up my power to something like, that's how I'm hearing it. I might be totally off, and I'm sure you'll get me on the right path.
It's a question of, so let's pose it to you this way. What do you think supports or drives the life in our world and the universe? Do you have something that you attribute that to? Because it's not you.
Right.
So if it's not you, it's got to be something else, right?
Yeah.
So that's something else, whatever that is. Don't give a crap what you call it. I happen to call it God. You can call it the universe. You can call it whatever the hell you want. You can call it trees and bushes. I don't care. There is a cooperative component that exists in that is there all the time. You
What is
feel it. You
how is it
experience
cooperative?
You talk about it all the time. You
But-
talk about it in your relationship to your relationship to nature, in your relationship to people. You talk about it all the time. So I'm talking about the same thing. What I'm talking about is also tied to an old story, apparently, because I know that if context will help, it was a reading that I had with a guy that I don't normally do, and I did because the
like
way
a psychic reading,
yeah,
numerology, or just
no,
seer or something?
it was, yeah,
Okay.
a guy that helps with his whole thing is about helping people clear blockages, not and to be able to destroy them so that they are pulled out of the history. In my way of understanding, basically the things that you can extract from history are things that you carry in your DNA. These things can be released in a very deep way that releases the generational chain of energy that's been carried for this stuff. So for me, there has been a many multi-generational experience and probably multi-life experience of a deep-seated religious context, whether it was a priest, a monk, anything in that nature that was all about dedication and focus to that, whatever it is, to God, to the universe, to working in alignment with whatever that is, however you see that, which, so operating from the space of love, operating from a space of compassion, whatever that is, however that shows up. So somehow I don't know the details of the disappointment, but I could see clearly that there were places throughout that experience for me that I was left feeling like, here I have given myself to this, and something showed up where I didn't feel like I was met. That energy met me, and so it created this kind of conundrum and confusion and created this frustration. So now I'm dealing with a particular energy in my life that I'm confused by, that I don't understand why it seems to be unyielding. And that unyieldingness is tied to this whole concept. And so as we were diving into this today, it went from looking at that to a much deeper energy of all of a sudden coming to a place of realizing that I'm doing it again. I am wanting so deeply and so powerfully to align with that universal force in whatever capacity that it is, that somehow I'm either still giving power away to something that doesn't exist, or I'm misunderstanding or misinterpreting or not getting the difference between thy will and my will. And that if I am in thy will, according to everything I understand, there should be a flow, there should be a clarity, there should be an ease to what takes place. So
I don't think you could have should and flow in the same sentence, but I follow everything else that you're saying.
Yeah, fine.
I don't think that there's any shoulds on how that stuff goes.
Right. So the ultimate question then comes down to this idea of what is, quote, thy will? What is that a thing, or is that a manipulation of my will into some other form, into some other
It's a good question.
thing, some other expression, some other, and I don't have any answer for it. I'm in the middle of that conundrum. So it's challenging in a very kind of foundational way. Because for me, it's never been a question in my entire life. It's never been a question. Even when I went to Catholic church and when I went to Presbyterian church and when I went to Baptist church, none of those things could change or alter the relationship I already had. So that relationship is very powerful and very real to me. So it's weird to then be in a place of going, well, maybe you made it up. Did you make it up? Is this just an expression of my will in a nicer form that doesn't look like my will? I know that's one channel to go down. Another channel to go down is this, are they different? And, to Jeff's point, we're all conjecture. We really don't have any way to necessarily know the answer to the question. But it seems like there has to be somewhere to get resolution, because the fact that I can have the question means that there's got to be something somewhere that I can follow a thread, connect a dot, something. And that's kind of where I am right now. So
if we were always in resonance, if we were always in harmony, if we were always at peace, and if we were always content here on the planet, what the F would we be doing here? There would be absolutely
Boring.
no point being here. So imagine being God for a moment. Try whatever that is, he, she, it, all by yourself. If we listen to the big story in the big good book, there was a time when only God existed, and that was it. How effing boring would that have been after a few millennia? How many times could you put the bag over your head, Timothy? That's an inside joke for those who aren't viewers or
that was
listeners.
Good. I was waiting for that. That's good.
So at some point, there's so many sacred texts that talk about God dividing itself into us.
Mm-hmm.
And we're here having these experiences as a manifestation and as a representation of God, to have all of these different roles that are beautifully written in these screenplays that are being enacted, layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. But I want to go back to what you about, Jim. It seemed that before we started the podcast, and even during your explanation of what the conundrum was or what the issue is,
yeah,
I was imagining you being like a magnet, and you're like, or a detector of magnetism, and you're walking your path, and at times you feel like the sensor is like, yep, I'm right on my path. I can feel the energy. I know I'm in flow. I think you used that word.
Yeah.
It seems like an assumption to me that when you're out of flow, that somehow that's an indicator of being outside of God's will. But if you are part of God and you came here, your perfect experience that you're having, that flow simply is a time when, even like Jesus said, Father, where art thou? Or, why have you forsaken me? There was even a time in Gethsemane when Christ felt like he was out of flow with the purpose for which he came to the planet, if that story took place the way that we read it and it's, archived. So, so what? So what if we feel like we're out of flow on occasion? We know how to get back.
Right.
Yeah.
We know how to get back. But the experiences that we're having along that journey when we're in this place of what we would call out of flow, I think those are sacred as well. There's just as much learning done with something like this on my hand. There's just as much learning this as there is from this.
Mm-hmm.
They're equal.
Well, the thing that struck me in what you said, and the thing that resonated the deepest, is the idea that because I'm not in flow, I'm not, quote, with God. I'm not with the universal energy. I'm not still in the bubble. That's very, very powerful, because that to me speaks to,
get out of the bubble.
Yeah, but that speaks to the to worthiness. That's a key place to find, gosh, I must not be worthy because I'm out of flow. God doesn't want me anymore. So wait a second. How did we go? That's like, making a quantum leap into nothingness. You're like, how did you go from 0 to 100 in that fast?
Absolutely.
What a powerful idea, though, that I need to chew on that a minute, because that's a really powerful thing there. The idea that I'm no longer in the bubble because I'm not in flow. And there's nowhere anywhere that I can think of that actually says that. You were referencing texts and things. I mean, they may get into sin. They may get into all that judgmental nonsense that doesn't serve anything. But maybe the crux of that judgmental nonsense was this crux, this point of I feel so connected, and what happened? What did I do? Why did I lose why am I not there now? What am I?
Right.
And so the mind wants to interpret it, wants to give it meaning and say, well, God's a little upset with you right now, or you didn't do X correctly, or whatever justification that we come up with to say I wasn't good enough in that moment, so the switch flipped.
Yeah.
I
used to experience a lot of that based on that indoctrination, being a kid and just not understanding that I could have a lot of flow in my life. And what I meant to say earlier about flow is that if you dumped a Olympic pool size body of water on the side of a mountain, if you just really imagine that, just maybe from a giant helicopter or something, that water is going to find its way, its flow, regardless if it runs into a boulder or a tree. It doesn't argue with that. It just simply notices it, if you could use that term, and then it finds itself on the other side, and it just keeps going over the terrain. Some of it's beautiful and easeful, and then it may go over and create a waterfall. It may just but I think when we're in that flow, like Jeff was talking about, there isn't a discussion about why is that boulder there. When I'm in flow, and I thankfully, the older I'm getting, the more that's happening. But I don't question why my stepdad has cancer now. I just found that out, and it's part of I'm just this body of water cruising along the countryside, and I'm flowing really easy sometimes, and sometimes there's something really in the way, but I'm going to find myself on the other side. And if I spend too much time trying to figure out why that boulder's there, or why that giant tree, or who put that fence there, and why is all this debris in my flow getting caught up on that. I'm jacking with myself. It's just, I'm a breath away, I'm a shavasana away from finding the ease of life. And to me, if I'm questioning anything, then I'm in, like Jeff was talking about, I'm in my ego. That's my will, and it's not. I can make myself really important if I want to, but the earth and the people in it and the way energy moves and my experience is something that I get to learn to dance with and be at ease with and simply notice, or I can be kind of reactionary to stuff. And when I'm reactionary to stuff, I have a really bad time. I don't feel very good. I don't look very good. I'm not a pleasant person to be around if I'm in that kind of space. So, and again, I talk about it all the time, but that's where yoga really has helped me, where other faiths and religion and practices hasn't been able to, because it got me in a certain kind of stillness that I didn't know before. And I don't quote the Bible very often, but be still and know that I am God has long been my favorite. And
points at which that happened.
Sorry about the technical difficulties.
Too funny.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Let's
wanna-
go. Can I piggyback off of that scripture?
Yeah.
Be still and know God. For God to truly know itself, how would God fully know itself? How is that possible for you to fully know yourself, for me to fully know myself? If you only walk one path and you only look in one direction, how could you know what you were if you walked that path or walked that direction? This set of circumstances happened to you. And so that's why it would seem to me that for God to truly know itself, it would have to divide itself into all of these lives that we're living. And we are all like little sensors contributing to the overall collection of knowing of what it is to be human, of what it is to be spiritual, of what it is to be God, of what all of this is. And every day there's more information coming into the collective pool of what it is to be, just what it is to be.
Yeah.
But we have to know what the full capability is to be. We have to know what it is to have a Saddam Hussein on the planet and an Adolf Hitler and a Gandhi and Teresa, if you want to use those as bookends. We have to, those are equally divine spiritual paths, in my opinion, ordained and holy and inspired and planned and very, very valuable for humanity to know what it is capable of. So God has to also know what it is capable of. And that would be impossible if it was all just flow and harmony and peace and love and pearly gates and casting your crowns before the slain lamb. And that just cannot exist by itself. That cannot be all that there is in the end, is just nothing but harmony. And the lamb lays down with the lion and blah, blah, blah. That would actually get boring after a while. I'd probably put the bag over my head at that point.
Well, it's interesting. That takes it to a whole other kind of plateau, because to the points that you were making, it means that if you're non-inclusive, then you're not allowing for the greater energy. You're not allowing for the existence of universal energy or God. Because I was thinking in terms of, we have our current government system, our current president, all of that in this premise is still under the umbrella of God's will, as it were.
Right.
And it's all part of the bigger picture. It's all part of that exploration. So because all of those individuals are also sparks of God that are experiencing another facet of this dynamic human experience. And what is that all? So So coming back around to though the core of the confusion or the question or the conundrum that is again, maybe the question isn't about God's will versus man's will. It's how much am I including, or is my version of God's will limited somehow? Or
Yeah, I'd go with that. I'd totally go with that one.
Yeah.
Resonated hugely, Jim.
what?
That
Wait.
resonated hugely with me. The limited version of what is will, what is our will, what is God's will? How is that even remotely knowable? And to me, it continues to expand.
By virtue of the fact that it's a question, there is something to be known. By virtue that the question has been asked means there is an answer to be known in some form, fashion. Maybe not all of it.
Right, we maybe get a little piece of the answer at a time, but I don't know that there's
well, I don't know I could digest it all at one time. I've heard that expression before too. If we were able to take in the true experience of this whole massive thing, we wouldn't be able to comprehend. It would be too much. It'd be too much for the human brain to comprehend.
I can see that there are some spiritual entities somewhere in the universe right now tuned into Adventures in Truth podcast, and they're laughing their butts off at our attempt to claw and scratch at the very tip of the iceberg.
That's
They're
right.
giving kudos for even attempting it.
So if we remove any idea of, I'm going to use the word again about attachment, if we can get away from an idea of how something's supposed to look or feel, and if we just can accept with compassion each chapter that we're living, you know, I like what you were saying, Jeff, about it being getting really tiresome, just being in just a cushy ride the whole time. I think that could be, but you have driven thousands of miles off road in some of the most grueling conditions possible. You've taken good care to make your vehicle as robust to handle that crazy, unpredictable terrain at times, to have the smoothest ride you could have. It's not that you're trying to control the terrain. You're trying your best to enjoy the ride. You put just enough utility into your vehicle. You put just enough comfort into your vehicle to make it survivable and doable, and maybe even at times enjoyable. But it's not trying to shift the terrain. It's shifting the way we experience the terrain, and that's an important distinction for me about this whole thing. I think that the terrain is crazy in this, on this planet. The political times and all. It's a very
We should time this and give a little heads up that, okay, you got about 10 seconds before the repeat goes down. It seems like it's timing on a pretty consistent basis.
Huh. Yeah. But so this idea of what the ride is supposed to feel like, was there ever a time when you were riding and maybe it was dark and you came upon something that you didn't know was there? Did you have a personal reaction to that, Jeff? Was it like did you feel like, what's that?
Many times. That's happened many times where there's an unexpected road or a.
But I guess what I'm asking is
kind of how this happened.
Yeah, exactly. But do you feel like that was source, God? Do you think that I think is it possible that you were finding your experience with God through these experiences, but did you take it personally that the terrain changed in a way that you weren't expecting? Did you think that something was trying to make it rough, like something out there was trying to make it rough? You weren't in alignment with something that was out there. Or was it just you doing what you love to do and kind of playing an edge and came across something? I'm just curious if that ever.
Yeah, it's a great question. it's almost been 2 years since I had my incident, and I've played it over in my head a million times as to why so close to the end of the finish line, and why couldn't I have just gone a different way or slowed down a little ever. But it's like to me, I was clearly supposed to have this experience.
Right.
There's
Precisely.
so many lessons that I've learned from it. Very painful and excruciating and expensive and blah blah blah. And but yet, it's my journey, and it's okay. It's the one that came my way. I could say I was out of flow. I could say that my ego, because the guy that was right next to me was my competition, and for some reason my ego needed to finish first. I wasn't willing to let him pass me, so I took a different line. And I could go into all that stuff, but at the end of all of it, here I am. And had it never happened, who knows? Maybe I would have 3 races later gone out there and broke my neck. I don't know. I have no idea whether this was the easier of the ways out, or I don't. That's just, to me, motivation to try to what if it and go down that road. But I don't really think that some force put an obstacle out there that I encountered because I was out of flow, if that's where you were going with that.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't.
I guess what I'm trying to do is, you love to race, you love to live life, and you are doing something that you loved. Something happened, and you're in a flow with what has happened. You're not arguing with the fact that I haven't experienced you arguing with this, like, why is this happening to me? Maybe you've had that in quiet moments, in great pain, but I that's not the sense of the man and the character that you bring. I don't see you doing that. And I think that that's analogous to how we can be with life, is that we try our best to get in the right kind of vehicle that can take us to wherever we're going, but to take it personally that something's unexpected pops up I don't know. I guess I'm not following that part of the conundrum that you're experiencing, Jimbo.
I have no idea where you came up with any of that, because I don't feel any of that. I don't experience any of that. I don't. I have. It
felt like you were taking it personal.
Okay, no. Now I'm okay. Rewinding. So somewhere in this myriad of pictures and emotions that were going on as this was happening, was this feeling of now I don't know what the specifics were of each individual circumstance, so I was only dealing with this sort of wave of emotion and pictures. So the sense was this idea that, and the conundrum is the question of what is God's will versus what is my will, and is there a difference?
Right.
What drove that was this feeling of,
what if that's a bad question?
Well, it could be. That's why, I mean, part of bringing it here is, in talking about it, is trying to.
I'm glad you did.
This happened today,
Mm-hmm.
like this morning. So I have been in it all day, sort of milling around, kind of feeling really off because I'm not. I know. I mean, if I'm feeling off, chances are good. To your point, I'm asking the wrong question. But this is where I got to with the questions. So I'm trying to figure out where to go, where to take it. So I thought that was the place that I kind of went, oh my gosh, really? Like, really? Because the feeling of the history was so powerful and so intense that, yes, there was a sense, Timothy, in it, of this sense of the way I interpreted it, and maybe that's the incorrect position, but the way I interpreted it was this sense of having given myself to this thing called God's will in an effort to be the best possible person I thought I could, whatever. I don't know all the story. And then somehow feeling like yeah, feeling like God didn't show up. And like, I don't understand how that happened. And that led me to the question, this particular question, but I'm not sure, maybe that's not the right question.
How do you know God didn't show up?
Well, but that was that, and then that comes around to your point, which was seeing the seeing what I'd said earlier about, sorry, I'm losing my words. That I was assuming that the experience was outside of God's will, or assuming that what I was
Is
feeling or
that
experiencing
possible?
was
Is what
outside.
you said even possible? Is it possible to be outside of God's will?
It doesn't even make sense that it would be. Logically,
Right.
it doesn't make sense.
But yet we've been taught that it is.
Yeah.
Isn't
Right.
that's so wrong?
Mhm.
It's so wrong to imagine that it's possible to come here and do this difficult journey and be out of God's will.
And oh my goodness. From the ego perspective, from the man's will perspective, what just struck me, what just like rifled through my body was this, like 14 things, but the quintessential, words, I need words. That is a stance without humility. That is a stance without connection. It seems like it's the biggest vanity ever to have that concept that you could that you could even possibly be outside of. Seems to be an enormous egotistical, vain kind of experience that you would choose to believe that you had that much humanness.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the word is. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's like holding yourself in this
Self-importance or something.
self-importance. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another good one. That was another one I couldn't find a minute ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's almost as though that is the energy. Well, that's the victim. That's the I showed up, but you didn't nonsense. But yeah, that's good. That's really good. That's because I don't know that I feel that way particularly. I think that being aware of that is an energy that I have carried for a long time, and it has to filter through somehow. So there's this overarching need to, I don't know.
So what if the good book, if
It's
the
good.
original story, if the original story said something like, "In the beginning was God," and then it goes through all the things that on the first day, second day, and the third day, and blah blah blah, and on the sixth day, God created man. So that gives the idea that God is separate from man. But what if instead it said, "In the beginning was God," and God spent some time alone, didn't really know himself or herself or itself, and therefore decided to create this planet called Earth among many other places in the universe that souls can go. Then at some point, God decided to divide itself into many different pieces and sent himself out or herself out to these various places in the universe to have all of these experiences that we call lives so that God could truly know itself. And it's as these lives were lived and the data comes back at the end of these lives and people have debriefs of their lives, God began to truly know itself in ways that it never could have before if it didn't have both the light and the dark, both the north and the south, the west, the nice and the not nice, all of these things. That's the only way that that could have ever actually been accomplished. But instead, we're taught that God is separate from us. God's over
Yeah.
there and I'm. But what if that's not true? What if it actually is never possible to be outside of the presence of God, to be outside of the energy of God or the love or whatever we want to
Right.
call that? That we're just simply having these lives, these experiences as necessary as little sensors out there in the universe collecting data so that God can truly know itself. Both the most amazing, sanctimonious, holy, loving, charitable aspects of God, as well as the most hideous, self-serving, nasty, vile aspects of what it is to be whatever we're going to call this, godlike, human-like, whatever that is. That's the only way it can know itself, is to continue to push the envelope and go farther in each of, if we think of the universe as an expanding universe, well, we also have to think of human experience as an expanding experience as well, both on the noble and as on the selfish side, or the whatever what the opposite of noble would be, or loving would be. So anyway, I'm sorry I rambled a bit, but what if in the very beginning we were taught that we're not separate from God, it is impossible to be separate from God, and that these experiences that we're having on the planet, you can't mess it up. You just can't mess it up. It's all good.
Yeah.
Anybody that's conducting an experiment knows that regardless of what the outcome of the experiment is, it's good, because it's going to tell you something about the original hypothesis. It's either proves it or it disproves it, or there's some combination in the middle.
So I'd like to know what we can learn from Jim's predicament today. When we feel like we're separate from source, from nature, from whatever those laws are. For me, if there's an indication that I'm arguing with any reality, if I'm thinking it's supposed to be different than what it is, that doesn't mean that if my breath stinks, I can go brush my teeth. It's not like that. It's if I'm having feelings and outcomes in my life that I'm not happy with, or the way something's resonating with me doesn't feel right. If I think it's supposed to be different than that one thing at that moment, then I know that I'm full of, for me personally, I know that I'm not in alignment, whatever that looks like. If I'm entertaining that it's supposed to be different than it is, it should be different than this, I just know I'm swimming in ego. And so, what are some ways that we can, when we start to recognize that, what are some practices that we can use to be mindful and simply notice? Because the ego is just absolutely cunning, and it really likes that self-importance and wants to rattle the cage. And
so why are you judging that, Timothy? It seemed to me like you were just
I'm judged my equipment. I know. I'm weak.
So if we are these amazing, loving aspects of God, wouldn't we need something to distort that signal to get us to be more self-serving, to get us to push us toward maybe the darker side of the light of whatever that is, so that it can truly know itself? Yeah. We would have to have something that's distorting that holy, amazing, aware, loving, tuned in, guided, always on signal. That's called the ego. That's what the ego does. It's a disruptive distortion of the signal of letting us know what is true and holy and lovable and awesome and perfect, so that we can, so that we're aimed in a more self-serving, self-important direction. It's on purpose that we have this thing called ego, right? And it gets us to step over the line. It gets us to take the cookie when mommy said, no, you've already had one. You're going to spoil your dinner. And ego says, F you, mom. Who are you to tell me what I can do?
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really powerful point in especially because it addresses the idea that all parts are part of the whole. So if all parts are part of the whole, then no part should be removed. If no part should be removed, then they all are supposed to integrate in some fashion that evolves. And it does, but it doesn't do it in a pretty way. It's all that the word that I love, that I've attached to, because I just like the feel of it, is contrast. that we create and consistently have contrast because of that duality, because of the ego-bound, earth-bound ego system that's trying to do its thing, and the spirit that's trying, or the energy or the soul that's trying to just hold the space for all of it. That's just there, kind of do your thing,
Right.
and so that leads to a little bit of another thing that I'm trying to sift into this and sort through, and that is this idea that as a human, then in this context, from the way I'm seeing it, is then that the human has to make choices. The human has to make decisions. The human has to make, when I say choices, I'm thinking of things in terms of what do you want to do, or what activity do you involve in, or
Do we have
what
to, or do we
relationship
get
do you
to?
get into?
I think that framework can make a big difference.
No, we're talking about, let me get the thought
Okay.
finished. That's it's not about a have to or a want to. It's
Get to. Yeah.
You completely disrupted my food of thought. Okay, moving on. Next,
I got to jump in here. Absolutely have to jump in here.
please.
So, this is going to get a little bit personal, and tell me if it's too personal and you can't talk about it. I don't think it will, but I want to go for something really that I believe is very powerful and very strong. We've
Cool.
been talking about how can God truly know itself, and what, unless it's willing to push the envelope and explore things that it previously did not know. So once upon a time, there was a story where there was a man and a woman created in this garden, and it was, the two of them were supposed to be together and to know each other in both an emotional and a physical way, and the byproduct of that was peace. Okay, so at some point in human history, somebody got the idea of, is that the only way that you can know somebody? What would it be like to know somebody if you were of the same? What would that be like? So how in the world could God truly know itself if it was willing to push the envelope and try this experiment called same-sex attraction, of which you, my friend Jim, are doing? And I admire that so greatly, and I have so much respect and admiration for that. To me, that's a higher level of evolution, that you're willing to say, you know what, the story that all of you heterosexual people are stuck to and living with, it ain't true, man. You can enjoy a man's love just as much as you can a woman's love. That's the only way that God could truly know itself, is to overstep those bounds and to go into places that previously weren't traveled into. And that,
And I've been on both sides of the equation. So
yeah, and so that you truly can know both sides of that equation. And I can't. To me, doing what you do, living the way you do, I cannot imagine it. It's not disgusting, but it's not disgusting at all. It, in one point in my life, it was, because that was my training, that was my indoctrination. Right. And I've opened up to that so much more so than I ever have before. But it isn't something that I see myself pursuing or being drawn to or attracted in this lifetime. Probably just isn't going to happen. But I do admire and I do respect that people that have been willing to push the envelope and have that experience, again, as a sense, to bring it back to the database, if there's a big daddy computer in the sky, of saying, you know what, a man's love and a woman's love is pretty much the same. It's about love. It's about love.
Wow.
It isn't about gender.
Yeah.
Wow, I really went off on that, didn't I?
Yeah. Yeah.
Powerful stuff.
It
I
is.
came back to I picked up my thread again. So the question that was leading to was the idea of action and the actionable. Because this is not thought through. I'm peeling this as I go. So this idea that as a human being, I have to make decisions in the context of my life experience. And then it is the execution of those decisions that are the space of, do I follow God's will or do I follow my will? That I can say, I'm moving to Denver. That's my choice. I don't know if that was necessarily God's will. I think it was my choice because I wasn't happy. So my unhappiness created a circumstance where I sat with it for quite a long time until I felt a sense of inspiration about what the next best thing to be. And what my mentor said to me, well, it sounds like you just need to make a decision. And I went, what? And she said it again. The only thing missing in the equation is the decision. The decision to say, this is what I'm doing now. This is what's going to happen. And so that was the beginning of this process. And then all of the magic came through, but also came through the clarity, meaning the decision was made. And so in that, I created a space. I sat in that space and I said, okay, what are my potentials? What are my possibilities? How do I want to evolve this? What do I want to see happen? And I have a partner who's having concerns and having issues and things that don't make sense. And how is that going to work? And how is that going to work? And out of the clarity of that decision, being able to say, this will be perfect. This will be fine. This is how this will work. This is what's going to happen here. Here's how we're going to lay this out as best as I know right now. And then the rest of it, we have to leave it to whatever, because I can't, I don't know all the answers, but here's what I have so far. And then seeing that all unfold in a completely beautiful way that was driven by the human who needed to make a decision. So how this ties in is going back to the idea of God's will versus man's will. Is it that the human has to make a choice about something in order for the influence of the universe to come in, to, as opposed to the idea of awaiting an inspiration or seeking an inspiration or meditating until you find an inspiration. This is where it's gotten really muddy, because that seemed really clear before, and right now it doesn't seem so clear anymore. Doesn't seem like, does that really matter? Okay, it's a good place to go to recharge. It's a good place to go to find a better place or space, to shift my state.
Sure.
But does it?
Imagine a world where everybody, let's use the Bible as an example of the rule book. If everybody followed the rule book, how would we ever get to practice forgiveness?
True.
There would be no need to even know how to forgive if everybody was following the rule book. So for the person who's willing to step in your context, step out of God's will to sin or do this dastardly deed, this self-egoic thing that is at the expense of someone else and harm, they believe that they've been harmed in some way, they then get the opportunity to learn how to forgive, which is a divine, sacred characteristic to know how to do. So we absolutely have to step out of God's will, if you want to put it in that context. We have to. We have to be assholes. We have to be rude. We have to be all these other things in order to give people a chance to truly love us. Because it's easy to love somebody who always loves you. If I thought nothing but amazing things about you, Jim, all the time, that wouldn't really be love. What's love is what I get to watch you and Timothy do from time to time, where you wrestle with each other and you grapple with each other and you're not really sure that you're saying what you think you're saying and blah, blah, blah. That's awesome to be able to watch that. And yet week after week, you guys come together and we do this thing and we pull it together, even though sometimes it feels like you're kind of wrestling with each other or whatever, whatever that is.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome to me. But if you guys were just kissing each other's asses the whole time and smooching on each other and, puffing each other up, nobody would be listening to this. It would just be like, oh, those guys are it's just a whatever, big smooch
sycophantic circle jerk.
Yeah, exactly. So could stepping outside of the rule book, if we're looking at God's will as following this list of rules, actually sacred and holy and divine, because it gives anybody else a chance to practice something that they would otherwise not get to practice. Called love, called self-acceptance. And the other thing too, if I do something that I know like this. If I know I'm doing something that has a high risk of personal injury and I do it anyway, can I still learn to love and accept myself, even though I did this to myself? And the answer is yeah. How else would I ever get to truly love and accept myself if I didn't jack myself up from time to time?
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, and
to
I guess, I mean, the truth is we all have our own versions of that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. My version is this. My version is putting myself through the paces of what the hell? What? Maybe I need to find another hobby.
When I was speaking earlier about a couple of things that you had said about shoulds, supposed to, as humans, we have to do these things. And I think you use the word like to execute this plan and all this kind of stuff. All I'm trying to say is that I've learned that if I'm in a position growing up on a ranch in Texas or whatever, if I thought I had to do something, it was harder for me to find joy. If I had some creative liberties with what the chore was or something like that, I could make it interesting. I could feel like I got to do something. So I think just the simple framework of how we see a day can have how we word and frame our existence can make a really big difference. So if I think I have to do something today in order to figure out God or him to figure out me or whatever the narrative is, if I could just wake up and just use words like, I don't have to do any of this. I get to do this. This is an amazing opportunity and I'm going to do the best that I can today. I might fall flat on my face and make a fool out of myself, or I might just have the right smile and the right handshake at the right moment, and my whole world changes with opportunity and things coming my way. But I think for me, a big distinction of happiness happened when I quit thinking about having to do stuff and that I get to do it. And it's seems like a very small calibration, but it can bring a tremendous amount of joy to the most mundane of things. And I feel like I'm kinder if I think I get to do it than if I have to do it. So that's all I was trying to get at earlier. It's just sometimes words are really, really, they're always powerful, but particular words can be undermining. So.
Would you guys join me for a moment in the Garden of Gethsemane? The garden, that dark place. Can you join me there for a moment? I'm trying to really wrestle hard with this idea of God's will versus my will. So the night that in the story where Jesus was betrayed by Judas, and Judas went and told certain people in the government where Jesus was going to be and how they could capture him. So here's this idea that Jesus took his disciples and they were praying for what? We weren't told. We were not told what they were praying for. We weren't told what Jesus said. Dudes, I'm about ready to get whacked tomorrow. Pray for me. Pray with me. What? What were they praying for? But in the most common scripture in the good book is like John 3:16, where it says something like, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whomsoever should believeth in him should have everlasting life." Okay, so if that was the plan, Jesus, you're going to earth, they're going to crucify you, and that's going to be the process for which everybody that accepts you is now going to have their sins forgiven, and they'll get the keys to the kingdom, and they can be up here in the sky with us. Okay, if that was the plan, if something like that was the plan from the beginning, and Jesus signed up for that plan, said, "Yep, I'm down for that, God. I can do this. I've been to SEAL training. I can do this," right? Whatever that was. Okay, so then Jesus is going through it. And at some point, he's like, "Hey, I'm not so sure I want to do this." I don't know. What was he praying for? What was he praying for that finally, when the guards came and arrested him and Peter cut off one of the centurion's ears and there was this whole ruckus and everything, and then Jesus put the dude's ear back on. That would have been pretty cool to see. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry my disciple cut your off. Here, let me fix that for you. Put it back on, and it didn't fall off. It stayed there. But even that didn't overcome everybody else's experience. It was like there was a set divine plan and path that Jesus was sent here to follow according to the story. So again, what the prayer, do you guys remember the prayer? Father, not my will be done, but thy will be done, as on earth as it is in heaven. That was the prayer. Jesus was praying, whatever I'm going through right now, God, I probably really don't want to do this thing called crucifixion, but hey, give me the strength, give me the power, give me whatever. I kind of want to do this for you. So was that Jesus' ego? Was that I don't want to get the shit beat out of me tomorrow? I don't want to have nails driven through my hands and my feet, and I don't want to have a spear jabbed in my side, and I don't want to bleed, and blah, 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 blah. We'll never know, because that part really wasn't written. But there was that statement, not my will be done, but thy will be done. And that's what Jim's going back to. That's where we're taught that there's a division between my will and God's will. But if Jesus was in alignment with coming here and traveling that path, he knew it from the beginning. I come here at age 33, I get betrayed, I get put on the cross, and I'm back home again. And everybody goes, yay, Jesus, way to go. You're the man. That's not how you guys were taught, huh?
No, well, it's interesting because the whole time you were talking, I kept all the word that kept going through my head was allegory, 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 allegory.
Yeah.
And the interesting part of that is that story exactly parallels exactly what we're talking about, which is this idea that we come to this place not really knowing what the heck we're doing, and we have a sense coming in. You've talked about that before too, Jeff. There's we have this sense of we're here to do something, but his life is like the statement is, come here, be you, be the unique expression of who you are. And yeah, you're going to do that. And when you do that, you're going to get abused. People are going to do things mean to you. You got to find a way to maintain your center. You got to stay on message. You got to stay focused. It's going to hurt sometimes. It's going to feel crappy, but you're above that. You are bigger than any of that. And this idea that I mean, sure, some of the pertinent things of the story may be more, what do you want to say, creative, in whether or not there's parallels to the spear and the, I've read some things, or the way they assessed what the symbology is of the stigmata and the getting stuck in the side and the crown of thorns. But anyway, it just struck me as interesting that it was a perfect allegory of what we've already been discussing, this idea of showing up, living this spark existence, having this ego, living in a world full of people who struggle with their own unique expression. And those people who honor their unique expression tend to get attacked, tend to get judged, tend to become the focus of negative, and that's part of what forges their clarity and forges their ability to step out of that mundane experience. So I was really digging that. That was kind of a cool place to go with it.
The biblical boneyard. Well played.
What I would like to point out to our dear listeners, anybody that's tuning into this and is still stuck with us, is how much more admiration I have for you that are listening, who have come to this planet without the knowledge, or with the magnet that gets wiped in front of our cortex that erases who we really are, where we really came from, that we are part of Source, that we are one. And we come here willing to have this experience, believing that we're separate from God, and we freaking do it anyway. We live our whole lives here anyway, not knowing or not believing that we're sons of God, or that we're divine, or that we are part of this amazing source of love. We do our whole lives believing that we're separate from that. It was easy to be Jesus. Jesus, boy, you took the easy way out. You came here knowing you were part of God. You came here knowing that exactly where you came from and exactly where you're going back to. I didn't come here that way. So whose path is more difficult?
Right?
What do you think about that, Jesus boy?
I like that a lot. And I would actually, I didn't want you to think we forgot that your question was, what were they praying about?
To the point of bleeding, wasn't there one of the epistles talked about praying to the point of bleeding, like drops of blood? And I don't know, it was pretty intense, whatever it was.
I don't remember that one. That's a new one on me. But I do like where this conversation has gone and evolved so far. The idea that there is no outside of God's will. It's all within that. Everything is within that umbrella, or the universe, whatever. But it does, it's so interesting because when you, like, for me, I feel like that relationship has been with me my whole life. I don't know what now, I mean, I know what I call it, but it strikes me as odd that where am I trying to go with this? To have that experience and then begin to wonder if it exists at all.
Yeah, sure.
Is it a fantasy life? Is it a fantasy life I created to maintain my sanity through the crazy choices I've made through my life? Interesting stuff.
What if it were easy?
What's that?
I just like to ask when I'm facing a difficult quandary and I'm kind of getting myself wrapped around the axle. I just ask, what if it were easy? I say that a lot, but usually I can just back up and become that water finding my way when I just think about, well, what if this were easy? Because usually the wisdom is already inside and I'm just getting in my way with some other story and another narrative about another chapter supposed to be a different way. And that's what Byron Katie says about that, is that's the beginning of suffering. The moment we start arguing with the current reality, we start suffering. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I appreciate you bringing, it took vulnerability and courage to bring that conundrum to the forefront today, Jim. I appreciate you. Appreciate you bringing it.
Yeah,
it was a good
curious. One. So I'm going to ask a direct question to you, Timothy, because I'm not sure if I'm misinterpreting. So I want to ask awesome. The question because it feels like in some of the words that there is a kind of a judgment of my place or what I'm trying to assess. And so I noticed that I kind of react to that because I'm like, no, I get where you're going, but that's not really what I'm trying to say. And so it feels like it's a perspective war, and I'm not trying to have one. I'm trying to put words to something I don't understand yet. We're very, very different people in the way we approach our life experience. Mm-hmm. All of the things that you said are valuable. But in my mind, none of them apply to what I'm trying to understand. And I don't mean that rudely. I just mean like, I get for people listening that are hearing this, those are incredibly valuable because they're nuggets that people can walk away with and say, wow, that's something I can take and use in my life every day. And that's amazingly powerful. I live there, but I don't, when this type of question shows up in my experience, it's not minor in any way, shape, or form to me. It rattled my cage from top to bottom. And so I am seriously looking at what does this mean in the scheme of my existence? That's my path. That's what I walk in this life is to as best as I can connect the dots and come to some understanding of what am I experiencing and why am I experiencing it. Now, I know that sometimes that need for why doesn't serve me. And in this case, it may not serve me. I don't know. I haven't reached a point of saying I don't know that that serves me yet. To have that experience in the way that I did today, to lead to the question and to be in that conundrum all day, to me speaks to the depth of the question. And I don't mean that because I'm a really great guy and I have awesome questions. I just mean in the context of my consciousness, in the context of my evolution, this thing, this monolith in my experience showed up. The analogy of the water is beautiful. The analogy of water is water takes the path of least resistance, always, because that's what it does. I'm not looking for the path of resistance. I'm already in it. I'm looking for the path of least resistance. I'm looking for how does this, for me, the idea that there is a flaw in the idea of God's will is deeply disturbing to me. It's not a kind of a gosh, am I acting out of my ego or am I not acting out of my ego? This is a very core fundamental thing to me. When I say I've had a relationship,
is it still in this moment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's still in this moment because it's still not resolved. There's been pieces that make more sense, pieces that have clicked into place, like the umbrella of everything is, and the idea that there is I don't know if it's current, and that's the part I've not been able to really assess yet with regard to the ego. We were talking in depth about that. What was the word? Self-importance. And those types of energies. I'm not at all averse to the idea that I could be operating from that, but it doesn't feel like that's my current modus operandi. It feels like it's something that I've carried a lot of times, and I've had a lot of that energy. And earlier in my life, I had a lot of that energy.
Right.
That's
Hey,
not.
Jim,
Yo.
what's coming to me right now in that crucifixion story, there was a point where Jesus cried out to God and said,
Why hast thou forsaken?
Father, why hast thou forsaken me?
Yeah.
That's what I have a sense that you are experiencing. And
in a very, very, very visceral way that I don't know what to do with.
And God never answered the question. The speculation never answered, right? The apostles speculated that it was because Jesus was taking on the sins of the world and God could not look at the sins of the world. But you and I don't believe that. We don't believe that there's such thing as sin. There's simply choice. So, however, what if when we by divine inspiration and by divine planning, we do things that are, say, outside the rule book, outside the easy way, outside. One of the things that doesn't fit for me, Timothy, about the water thing is I'm higher evolved than water. So although it applies in a physics way, it doesn't apply with water. Doesn't have an ego. Water doesn't have free will. It does what it does by the laws of nature, of which I'm far greater than that. So if it is possible perhaps for God to not participate when we step on the other side of the line, not join in with, maybe we do feel a little bit of separateness. Maybe, I don't know. Sure. But it's in the book. It's a scripture that anybody who's ever been to church has heard before. It's one of the big, probably in the top 10 scriptures. Was Jesus in his own will when that happened? No, of course not. He was executing flawlessly, according to the story, the path that he was supposed to travel. Yet he still felt like God turned his back on him. And that's exactly what you said earlier. God's not here with me. I must be out of God's will. Jesus wasn't outside of God's will. Where in that story was it possible for him to be outside of God's will?
That is, that's really powerful, and deeply emotionally affecting.
Yeah, me too. I'm feeling it too, man.
I don't even know where to go with that except to just leave it alone for right now because it's
Okay.
um yeah, that's it. It brings that overwhelm to such a place that I can't even like see. I'm like, "Ugh." But
I love it when that.
yeah, right. But extraordinary. I mean, it speaks really to the heart of this this thing, this
Yeah.
this awareness that I mean, my whole desire in it from the get-go, from it when it happened was, Jim, just be with this, let it go, let it do its thing. And I could feel myself all day grappling, and not in an aggressive way, just like, is there a thread? Is there something I can, here I have this thing sort of drop in me and I'm going, okay, now where, what next? And um yeah, so very powerful. Thank you. That'll take me into my nighty night time where I can disconnect from the physical world for a minute and kind of let this stuff matriculate.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking about if I were playing the role of God and one of my kids were being crucified, would I actually be able to stay there and watch that whole thing go down? Or would I just have to at some point say, wow, I can't do this. I gotta leave. I can't do this. I'm sorry, son, but you're on your own right now. And I'm sorry I let you down or I failed you or whatever. I cannot watch my son go through this. I
Mm.
can't be part of it. And Jesus was tuned into that apparently. And perhaps that's all it was. I mean,
But
how could you as a
isn't
parent watch your kid go through that?
isn't Jesus God anyway? Isn't he watching himself be sacrificed? I mean,
Sure.
Yes.
Yes. Yes,
so
but no.
yeah, yeah.
Well, it reminds me of in the law of attraction, we talk about, she talks about at times, uh, how people argue for their limitations, and that we have so much freedom that we are so free, we can put ourselves in bondage. That's how free we are. But the thing that strikes me in line with what you were saying that she talks about is that energy, that universal force, God, your higher self, whatever, um, never looks in the direction of deficiency or of lack or of that. It's always holding the space for love. It's holding the space of expansion. It's holding the space of evolution and forward motion. And so if we're back there arguing for our limitations, nobody's there arguing with us,
Yeah.
because the focus of all that is on forward motion, is on that progress and that movement. So the feeling of separation is because the individual, I've turned my back and said, no, I want to argue for my limitation. I want to keep that. And so that tension, that conflict, that contrast is what stimulates that new desire, that stimulates that new desire for connection and for that alignment, et cetera,
Who
et
did you say
cetera.
that was?
Abraham Hicks, Law of Attraction.
Okay, yeah.
Um, she says it a lot better than I just did, but the point was that
But no,
there's never a point.
you nailed it, and I think she said it a lot better than I did. That's what I was essentially trying to get at earlier, and so I sorry if that didn't come across as being compassionate or if I ruffled any feathers on that deal. But you were asking me a question earlier, and I don't know if I heard the
Got a
the
question
end
in
of
the end?
yeah. You said you had a question for me, and
No,
I was
I think you just clarified it.
okay.
I think I was just needing to clarify, or at least say in words, that sometimes it seems that they're that almost as though we're talking in the same house but in different rooms.
Sure,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
It is what it feels. So there's a little bit of a rub there, and some of it, I mean, all the time it's helpful because it forces more clarity. It forces more, use better words, use more clarity. give better context, you
Yeah.
know, and that's always valuable.
Yeah.
But I don't want it to, yeah, I don't know if there's any more to say about it.
Yeah.
That was Timothy. On Monday, I had my staples removed. This is in response to your comment about wasn't Jesus watching himself be crucified. And as I was watching my staples get removed, there was a part of me that was so curious about how this tool worked, to be able to grab the center of the staple and separate it in such comes out without pulling the skin up with it. Because you see a staple go into a piece of paper and the two ends come around and they bind underneath. So it's like, how does grabbing it in the middle separate it from underneath so that it can come up and not rip the skin, right? So there's a part of my scientific mind that really wanted
gotta
to
see this.
happen, right? I gotta see this.
Yeah.
But there was a part of my mind that says, if you watch this, it's gonna freaking hurt even more.
Yeah.
Right? So she did like two of them. And then I said, can you stop for a moment? And so then I looked over and I actually saw what was happening to the staple. So that there were like two pieces on the side and one in the middle, and it pushed it down in between. It forced it to open up. And once I saw how it was happening, then I could still look away, because I did not, it just, for me, if I'm watching somebody work on myself, it just makes it hurt that much more.
Yeah.
And so even if Jesus was watching himself be crucified, I'm still thinking he probably looked away, because it just hurts a whole lot more to watch what is going on.
You disassociated. Yeah, that's funny.
Oh man, good stuff tonight, guys. Are we getting close to the point of wrapping it up?
I think so.
I think the energy has hit an ebb, which is usually the indication that we've run the course on this particular topic for this day. Does anybody want to
try to summarize?
Go ahead, Jeff. Take it away.
This was largely out of my element. This is lots and lots of the biblical boneyard, lots of Jesus, lots of stuff that we usually don't have so much reference to. So, so it was a little challenging for me today.
Yeah. Well, anybody that's ever had any instruction or indoctrination or teaching into this stuff, in my opinion, of which I'm willing to be wrong, but it doesn't feel like I am. That's all I can say. Is we're just pushing the envelope on what if we were taught wrong, and what if the questions that we're asking just are not good questions because of what we've been taught. And so one of the questions that we kicked around a little bit tonight was God's will versus man's will, and one of the outcomes in our discussion was, what if they're not separate? What if they are the same? Like, it's just not possible to be outside of God's will. So that was one of the main points that we pushed around quite a bit, and we used many different examples to go through all of that. We also talked a little bit about this God knowing himself or herself or itself through all of our experiences, and that truly is the only way for an organism to know itself, is it has to do experiments, and it can't just do the same thing over and over and over and over again, because that's such a limited definition of what it can be and what it is. So it has to constantly be expanding and push the envelopes on all sides, not just two sides, but if you think of it as an expanding sphere, on all sides of that sphere, it has to constantly be expanding to truly know itself and to not judge itself, to know this is what I am, this is what I'm capable of, this is what I can be. And that there is tremendous value in having an adversary in life, because it gives us the opportunity to practice these noble things that we call character builders, like love and acceptance and peace and forgiveness. And that is the only way to practice that, is if there's some foe, adversary, enemy, unkind person in your life. It's by divine appointment that we experience these things, challenges, hardship, whatever you want to call it, that really give us the opportunity to know who we are, to truly know who we are, to truly know what we're made of. And I swear I would not take back any of the hardships, challenges, difficulties, trials, whatever you want to call them. I wouldn't trade any of them in for an easier way. because it allowed me to know who I really am
Yeah,
and who
absolutely.
I'm becoming and what I believe in and what's really important to me.
Yeah.
And there's still things that I'm in the process of developing and growing and learning, and that's all. I guess that's why I'm still here. I ain't done yet.
That's right. Well said. Well said indeed. So it's a great dive in. Go ahead, Timothy.
I was just going to say, I think you're about to wrap it. Go ahead. I was just going to say until next week.
Yes.
Yeah,
If you
this
like
is
what
fun.
you're hearing, make sure you check out our YouTube page, subscribe, share with your friends, check out our Facebook page, come say hi. We'd love your feedback. We'd love your input. Let us know what your thoughts are about the podcast and what you're hearing and learning and experiencing through it. And we appreciate you all very much, and I appreciate you two very much.
Likewise.
I do get
how,
input. There are people joining our webpage because it shows up on my phone. There's probably at least one or two a day where I get a little hit that somebody's joined, become a member of the YouTube page, the Facebook page. So
Yeah.
people are
Good.
It is happening, growing.
And if you have any questions or comments or topics that you'd like to see us cover, hit us up. See what it'd be a fun way to play. We could cover it. We could do a little Q&A from time to time. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Sleep like
Gentlemen,
a baby, Jimbo.
Happy on the Halloween. Get out there and get your candy, kids.
All right.
Good night, guys. See ya.
Good night,
Sorry about the
everybody.
technical
Good night, Timothy.
difficulties. I'll get that solved. Okay, bye.
Okay.
Right on.
Bye-bye.
Later.
Bye-bye.
Stop recording. And